Chapter 11, Call the Doctor. Try harder, Granny Greenleaf tells me. Don't climb the rock, jump over it. You can do it. But I'm just a little tad and I can't jump very high yet. Use a little leg power. You won't hop high unless you try, she says. I'll try, I promise. I'm used to having guests in room 26. Parents come into the classroom sometimes, and of course, Aldo comes every night during the week. Sometimes Principal Morales drops in, always wearing a different tie. But on this day, a total stranger comes into the room. It's our surprise visitor. Mrs. Brisbane prepares us for this unusual event first. Class, since we are dealing with the issue of whether Og belongs in the classroom, that gets my attention, and I'm afraid I let out an extra loud boing. I'm waiting to hear Humphrey's excited squeaks, but he's still in his little house sleeping. I guess I would be too after the long workout he had on the wheel. Mrs. Brisbane laughs. That's got Og's attention. Anyway, I decided to bring in an expert, a herpetologist from the university. What? That's AJ in his loud voice. Herpetologist, Mrs. Brisbane patiently explains. A person who studies amphibians like Og and reptiles like snakes. Some of the big tads say, ooh. Way to go, I shout. I never heard of a herpetologist before, but I like this human already. Mrs. Brisbane continues, the herpetologist will talk to us about releasing captured frogs into the wild. We need more information before we make a decision, Mrs. Brisbane continues, and Dr. Okeke is an expert. Okeke, Richie repeats. What's that? It's an African name, Mrs. Brisbane says. I like saying it, Richie replies. Okeke. I know what he'll say. Heidi's very sure of herself. He'll say Og belongs in the swamp with his friends and his family. You don't know that, Gail declares. They glare at each other. Dr. Okeke is a she, a woman, Mrs. Brisbane says. Let's hear what she has to say. The door opens and a smiling woman wearing big round glasses enters. Are you ready for me now, she asks. I certainly am, I answer. After all, I'm more interested in meeting a herpetologist than anyone else is. Ah, our ranaclamitons, Dr. Okeke says, walking toward my tank. We call him Og, AJ explains. I hear a rather poor imitation of a boing, and I realize right away that it's Kirk. Mrs. Brisbane gives him the kind of look that quiets him down. Dr. Okeke leans down and peers into my tank. Her glasses make her eyes look unusually large for a human. He's a fine specimen, she says, a very handsome frog. Thank you, I answer politely. And you say he came from Mackenzie's marsh, she asks. Mrs. Brisbane nods. That's what we've been told. He was frognapped from his friends and his family, Heidi blurts out. But he loves room 26, Gail adds, and we love him. Yeah, they love me so much they want to send me back. He came to us from another classroom, Mrs. Brisbane explains. We're not sure what we should do. Dr. Okeke stopped staring at me. Thank goodness, as I was feeling a little edgy. Ideally, the best place to get a pet frog is to buy it from a dealer who raises them, she tells the class. Yes, but that's a little late for that, Mrs. Brisbane replies. What you should know is that frogs in the wild are rapidly disappearing, she says. That's a huge global concern. I'll say it's a big concern. Where are they disappearing to? What's happening to them, Saya asks. She's so shy, I'm surprised she spoke. Diseases, new predators coming into their habitats, pollution in their water. In many places, their habitats are being destroyed by building houses, Dr. Okeke says. In order to slow down their decline, in some places it's absolutely illegal to take frogs out of the wild. Here I was worried that I'd end up in jail, but now I'm afraid Mrs. Brisbane will end up in jail. Austin March's grandfather surely will be locked up. My advice is that you should never buy or adopt a frog if you don't know where it came from, the herpetologist continues. That's good advice, Mrs. Brisbane says, but what about taking him back now? It may be safe to release a frog if you release it to its place of birth, Dr. Okeke continues, but Og may have picked up human germs here in the classroom that could affect the other creatures back in Mackenzie's marsh. It could wipe out an entire population near his home. Who? Me? I'd never do a thing like that if I could help it. Home. My heart feels a little tug. Home is where Granny Greenleaf and Uncle Chinwag and Jumpin' Jack live. Home is full of crickets and dragonflies and other yummy bugs, but home also has hungry enemies like birds with large beaks. Still, there's no place like home. But what if I have picked up something that would harm my friends and family? What if they all disappeared and I was to blame? Richie suddenly jumps up and stands by his desk. He's our pet. We love him. Gail also rises to her feet. What would happen to him back in the marsh? He could be eaten? She shudders. I shudder too, because it's true. But he's wild, Garth insists. He should live out in nature. Should we all go live in caves because humans used to live out in nature too? That's a surprising comment from Art. Art may not always pay attention, but he is smart. But his friends and his family, he must miss them so much. Heidi has tears in her eyes. You see our problem, Mrs. Brisbane tells Dr. Okeke. The herpetologist nods. I do, but be careful not to think of animals as if they are human. They don't necessarily think and feel the way we do, and life in the swamp isn't easy. That's the truth. Have you ever stared at a snapping turtle in the face? Or been hungry for a long, long time? Even though I'm cold-blooded, that thought gives me a chill. Most wild animals don't stay with their families, Dr. Okeke says. Many of you have pets that have left their parents and brothers and sisters. Everyone in the classroom is silent. There are other options, Dr. Okeke says. There's a local wildlife center I work with called Piney Woods. Oh, I've been there! It's cool! AJ says. Dr. Okeke nods. It is cool. There are nature hikes and we have educational program with both indoor and outdoor exhibits. There are all kinds of animals there, from wolves to eagles. If you don't want to keep Og as a pet, he could find a nice home there and help educate people about frogs. Wolves? Eagles? I think I'd prefer to stay here with the big tads. But I think he should be in the wild, Heidi says. I know, Dr. Okeke agrees. That's why I mentioned this option. While he couldn't be back with his friends and family, we would create a natural environment for him with grasses and water, so it would be more like the marsh and he'd have more space. The big tads are quiet for a moment. Could he hop around more? Garth asks. Definitely, Dr. Okeke replies, and hundreds of children like you could see him and learn about frogs and how endangered they are. Could we visit him there, Saya says. Of course, Dr. Okeke nods. Do you have any other questions about frogs? Gail giggles as she raises her hand. If you kiss a frog, will it turn into a handsome prince? Dr. Okeke chuckles. I can guarantee it will not, but it could make you feel a little sick. In fact, there are frogs that are deadly poisonous. Not Og, of course. I definitely am not, I assure them, the very thought of it. He peed on me, Mandy blurts out, and all I did was pick him up. Dr. Okeke goes on to explain that frogs often urinate when they are picked up. It's a natural defense against enemies. But I'm not Og's enemy, Mandy replies. I think he's cute. I think Mandy's cute too, when she's not complaining. Og didn't know that, Dr. Okeke says. How would you like it if a giant hand came down from the sky and picked you up? Mandy rolls her eyes and says, I wouldn't. After a few more questions, Mrs. Brisbane thanks Dr. O'Keefe. You've given us a lot to think about, she tells her, and we thank you for your time. Before she leaves, Dr. O'Keefe passes out Save the Frogs buttons. She even leans one up against my tank. Thank you, I tell her. You're welcome, Og, she replies. I hope humans will save the frogs. I hope my friends will save me. Having a guest was special, but there was even more excitement in room 26 at the end of the week. The big tads are always chatting and laughing when they aren't studying. They're as full of energy as a lively swarm of flies back in the swamp. But on Friday, they're even more energetic than usual. They're more like a billowing, buzzing swarm of locusts. It takes me a while to figure out what's causing the hubbub, but there's a lot of talk about Richie's birthday party, which is coming up on Saturday. We frogs don't have birthday parties, but our hatch day parties are loud, leaping, jump for joy celebrations. It sounds as if Richie's will be one too. He's invited all the big tads, and he says there will be a magician to perform amazing tricks like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and that's just part of Richie's plans. I couldn't help noticing that I didn't get an invitation, but neither did Humphrey. So I am shocked right off my rock when Mrs. Brisbane announces that Richie will be taking Humphrey home for the weekend. He gets to go to the party. I have to say, Richie does ask Mrs. Brisbane if I can come too, and I'm hopeful until she says I'm going home with her instead, and that her husband has a special surprise for me. I think pulling a rabbit out of a hat would be a pretty good surprise, but I wonder what tricks Bert has up his sleeve.